Picture this. You open your eyes and your stomach is already clawing at itself from hunger that never fully goes away. Your fingers have gone numb, and outside the wind is so vicious that stepping into it for even 10 minutes could be the last mistake you ever make. Now stretch that single freezing morning across an entire lifetime, then across thousands of lifetimes stacked one after another, with no furnace, no insulated walls, no glass windows, nothing standing between soft human flesh and the merciless cold except whatever could be hunted, skinned, or set on fire. That was simply Tuesday for our ancestors during the Ice Age. Here is the uncomfortable part. If someone teleported you into that world tonight, with your phone, your education, and everything you currently know, you would most likely be dead before the week was out. It wouldn't be a failure of intelligence. It would be a failure of preparation, because raw knowledge was never enough on its own. Surviving the Ice Age demanded a level of physical and social adaptation so extreme that much of it barely sounds believable now. And to pull it off, our ancestors didn't simply adjust their routines a little. In some cases they did things that read less like clever survival tactics and more like something out of a horror script. Let's set the scene, because most people badly underestimate how punishing this era truly was. At the peak of the last Ice Age, roughly 20,000 years ago, temperatures across huge stretches of the planet plunged far below anything we experience today. Colossal sheets of ice smothered enormous regions of North America, Europe, and Asia, turning familiar landscapes into frozen wastelands. Humans, a species born and shaped in the warm plains of Africa, abruptly found themselves fighting for survival in conditions closer to modern Siberia than anything evolution had ever prepared them for. We carried no thick fur, no insulating layer of blubber, no built-in defense against a climate that wanted us dead. Against Ice Age winters, the naked human body simply did not stand a chance. Every scrap of protection our ancestors possessed had to be invented from scratch, taken by force, or torn from the bodies of other animals. Which leads directly into the first deeply unsettling survival tactic: wearing the dead. Early humans figured out fast that their own skin offered almost no defense against the killing cold, so they wrapped themselves in someone else's instead. Animal hides became the only real wall standing between a person and death by freezing, and these weren't scraps from harmless creatures. Evidence indicates that humans relied on bear hides for hundreds of thousands of years. Stop and consider what that actually involved. Obtaining a bear hide meant either killing or scavenging from one of the most formidable predators roaming your world. Then came the skinning, the wearing, the sleeping inside at night after night. Your continued existence depended on draping yourself in the pelt of a creature that, under slightly different circumstances, could easily have torn you apart. For tens of thousands of years, that clothing stayed crude and shapeless, loose hides simply thrown over the body. It kept people alive, but it never kept them comfortable. And comfort was never really the point. Survival was, because at temperatures this brutal, exposed skin doesn't just sting or ache. It dies outright. Frostbite loomed as a constant, unrelenting threat. Blackened fingers, ruined toes, permanent damage from a single careless moment outdoors. There were no clinics to visit, no antibiotics waiting on a shelf, no second chances handed out. Then, around 30,000 years ago, a tiny object reshaped the entire trajectory of human survival. The needle, a slender tool carved patiently from bone or ivory, small enough to disappear inside a closed fist yet powerful enough to alter the course of history. For the first time, people could actually sew garments that fit the contours of the body instead of simply hanging off it. Rather than draping loose hides and hoping for the best, they could layer multiple pieces together in ways that trapped body heat and kept biting cold air locked out. Clothing crafted from reindeer, fox, and other hides suddenly became dramatically more effective at doing its job. It might not sound like a dramatic breakthrough by today's standards, but it likely allowed entire populations to spread into and survive in regions that would otherwise have remained completely uninhabitable. And yet every single piece of that clothing still carried a steep price. Every coat, every glove, every extra layer meant another animal had lost its life, and someone had spent long, freezing hours scraping and working that hide by hand using nothing but crude stone tools, exposed to the very cold they were trying to defeat. Now here is where the story turns even darker: the shelters people called home. Across many Ice Age landscapes, there simply weren't forests nearby to supply timber, nor convenient caves offering shelter from the storm. So humans built with the only large-scale material the land actually provided, and that material was bone, specifically the bones of mammoths. Across sections of Eastern Europe, archaeologists have unearthed genuinely astonishing structures assembled almost entirely from mammoth skulls, ribs, tusks, and other skeletal remains. These weren't chaotic, random heaps either. They were deliberately engineered dwellings, layered over with hides and packed earth to block the howling wind and hold in whatever warmth could be captured. Human beings were, quite literally, constructing their homes out of the skeletons of giants. Try to picture drifting off to sleep inside a structure built from skulls, ribs, and curling tusks, listening to the wind scream past the walls while snow piles higher outside, with nothing but the bones of a creature that once weighed several tons standing between you and death by exposure. For Ice Age humans, none of that registered as a nightmare. It was simply what home looked like. But perhaps the most unsettling theory of all has nothing to do with what our ancestors hunted or built, and everything to do with what may have happened inside their own bodies. At a site in Spain known as Cima de los Huesos, translated as the Pit of Bones, researchers have uncovered evidence suggesting that ancient humans may have endured astonishing levels of physiological stress during the coldest stretches of the year. A number of scientists have floated a genuinely controversial idea that ancient humans might have entered a state resembling hibernation. Not the deep, true hibernation of a sleeping bear, but rather a dramatic, deliberate slowing of activity and metabolism to survive the harshest, most food-scarce months of winter. This evidence remains fiercely debated within the scientific community, and plenty of researchers reject the theory outright. Still, the simple fact that serious scientists are even willing to entertain the idea says something powerful about just how extreme Ice Age survival may have truly been. Imagine a winter so merciless that merely staying alive required your own body to fundamentally change how it operated, conserving every last calorie, slowing every unnecessary process, all just to hang on long enough to greet the spring thaw. And then there is the most uncomfortable truth of all: not everyone made it through. As the Ice Age dragged on relentlessly, our closest evolutionary relatives, the Neanderthals, quietly vanished from the Earth. These were people who had spent hundreds of thousands of years growing physically and culturally adapted to Europe's punishing cold, and in many respects they were arguably better equipped for that environment than modern humans ever were. And yet they disappeared anyway. Climate instability, dwindling food supplies, and fierce competition for dwindling resources likely combined to push their populations past the point of recovery. Eventually, an entire branch of the human family tree blinked out of existence forever. Modern humans endured. Neanderthals did not. Scientists continue to argue over exactly why that happened. Some point toward superior technology. Others emphasize wider social networks and stronger group cooperation. Some believe it came down to a slow accumulation of many small advantages compounding over generations. Whatever the true explanation turns out to be, the outcome remained unchanged. Only one branch of humanity walked out of that era alive. So how, against odds this staggering, did our ancestors actually make it through conditions that wiped out entire competing populations? The answer was never a single dazzling invention. It was cooperation, plain and simple. Archaeologists have recovered tools, ornaments, and raw materials hundreds of miles away from wherever they originally came from, proof that even in some of the most hostile environments on the planet, human groups stayed connected to one another across vast distances. Those connections carried far more than objects. They carried trade, shared knowledge, mutual support, and at times, survival itself. When one group faced starvation, a distant group might step in to help. In a world this openly hostile to human life, cooperation was never simply an act of kindness. It was a calculated, essential survival strategy, and quite possibly the single greatest tool our species ever developed. Pull all of these threads together and the picture that emerges isn't really a tale of effortless cleverness. It's a portrait of desperation dressed up as ingenuity. Wearing the skins of dangerous predators because your own bare skin offered no protection whatsoever. Constructing homes from the bones of giants because nothing else was available to build with. Possibly pushing the human body toward physiological limits scientists are still struggling to fully understand today. And watching an entire sister species of humanity fade into the cold forever. We like to picture our distant ancestors as simple or primitive. But surviving at this level demanded something closer to brutal, unrelenting genius. Every invention, every fragile alliance, every hard-won adaptation was built directly on top of starvation, frostbite, grief, and fear, layer by layer, the same way those ancient coats were stitched together one desperate season at a time. So tonight, when you pull a blanket over your shoulders and grumble about the chill in the air, remember something important. Your ancestors survived winters so ferocious that an entire other species of human vanished beneath their weight. They wrapped themselves in the dead, slept surrounded by skeletons, and endured conditions that would kill most people alive today within a matter of days. You are warm tonight not because humanity adapted flawlessly to the cold, but because, generation after generation, they simply refused to surrender to it, clawing out just enough survival to pass that stubborn determination down the line, all the way to you.